So let's come across quite a new topic, something which fertility published and something worth having a think about is, are we looking at a trigger that often has been missed? Is what is the primary hormone that initiates trigger? Is it estrogen that, as we normally have believed, that the rise of estrogen and the peak of estrogen triggers the LH surge and the FSH surge? Or is it the shift in progesterone that initiates the process? So let's look at what is the new theory about. It's looking at progesterone role in ovulation. And what we know is that progesterone surge, that is a small change from the baseline of progesterone, precedes estrogen peak and the gonadotropin flare by about 12 hours, suggesting that the progesterone may play a role in trigger of ovulation. What we also know is that when you trigger gonadotropins and when you literally give a trigger, when you give IM progesterone, and you see a rise of FSH and LH. And there is theory that believes that progesterone may be the signal that the hypothalamus is waiting for a follicle that has been readied by estrogen for a timely trigger. So let's have a think about this. As if you look at progesterone through the follicular phase, it keeps low levels, and they're stable during follicular phase, allows LH to accumulate, progesterone receptors become more sensitized, and that subsequent shift of progesterone within that narrow window, just a minor shift, then triggers gonadotropin surge. Look at it from a blocker point of view. In contraceptive preparations and using high doses of progesterone as an antagonist, progesterone blocks, it desensitizes progesterone receptors, and it continuously drains the pituitary of FSH and LH, preventing ovulation. That's probably the way it works as an antagonist when used as an antagonist. The timing is the key, whether you want to block ovulation or you want to trigger ovulation, that often tends to be the key. Now, if you have a look at it and see and look at the progesterone surge, we think that the progesterone surge will be preceding by about 12 hours. So let's look at estrogen. And if you look at estrogen priming, it seems that we know that estrogen, as it rises, its sudden peak will allow the FSH and LH to start rising, mainly as feedback mechanism. So while both estrogen and progesterone are essential, estrogen primes the follicle. Its role is priming and preparing the hypothalamic pituitary axis for progesterone triggering. Why we think it's limited is because estrogen levels are never stable. They are fluctuating and they change from cycle to cycle. And the LH surge which happens then triggers ovulation and sends the cascade that tends to happen. So why is it that this theory may be important? Is because it helps us to understand how ovulation happens. Where do I find it important? I find it important in modifying natural cycle, because the key that when the LH will rise probably comes from the small shift of progesterone. That mild raise of progesterone before LH rise may start giving us an idea that ovulation may be happening. And I think it will help us to plan our antagonist cycles, to be able to see the risk of early ovulation, which may be happening too. In addition, in nature, it will probably give us an idea of when to trigger ovulation or predicting ovulation and giving us an improved timing. I think this will probably shift the way we think about natural ovulation. I think there's something which we'll be able to include in our clinical practice, looking at why the progesterone shift occurs, and secondly, how that very minor shift of baseline progesterone may be important. So let's go back and look at what happens in a follicle if you use this theory. There's estrogen priming of the follicle rises and the follicle increases in size, it gets ready for the LH surge. Then there's a shift that occurs from progesterone in a narrow window 12 hours before the LH surge, triggering FSH and LH rise. Ovulation then occurs and then a cascades mechanism starts. It may be true because I think you start seeing the implantation window open up just after ovulation, and that's probably with the LH surge, which is the LH activity, being preceded by progesterone. So in conclusion, let's review the new perspective. Is progesterone as a trigger, low stable levels during follicular phase allow LH accumulation on progesterone receptor sensitization. That is what happens when a small surge of progesterone then goes ahead and leads to episodic surge. On the other hand, your progesterone is a blocker, using synthetic progesterone as contraceptive or using it as we believe in an antagonist where you desensitize receptors. And by desensitizing progesterone receptor, you're draining FSH and LH. You're in fact reducing, and probably that's the way it's working. And it prevents ovulation from interfering with gonadotropin release. So I would say that to a certain extent, we are looking at a slightly different way of how progesterone works in nature. And maybe understanding this fact may help us to start the process of improving our fertility practice.